Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Tristan Kumar proudly presents to you the one, the only Dying Planet, Prison of the Survivors. Narrated by the one and only Tristan Kumar. Part 14, Déjà Vu. I looked in fear at the boy, but suddenly he faded away. Everything did. I was in a museum. It was empty. I walked around looking at Egyptian and Greek artifacts. "Excuse me?" someone said. I turned around and saw myself. I stared in shock. It was me when I was 14 years old. I was now 15. I started looking around at my younger self. "How is this possible?" I murmured to myself. "You made it. Come on, let me show you something," he said, happily as he ran around the corner. I ran after him. We passed so many artifacts so quickly that it would probably take hours upon hours to look through them all. Then I ran past him. I ran back and he stopped. He looked at the door. "Ready?" he asked me. "Go right ahead," I said, but I hesitated when he started forward. Was this even me? Was this another trick? Where was I? I decided that it didn't really matter, so I walked forward and opened the door. We walked inside the empty room. He flipped a lever, and the lights turned on. My jaw dropped. Pieces of paper were flying around the room in a formation that looked like it was magical birds. Around it, there were boxes. Trillions of boxes. All of them had a label. The row of boxes seemed to go into the end of time itself. The ground was glass, but under it was an ocean, with sea creatures. I looked up. The ceiling was coated in gold, with a chandelier hanging down the middle. Little me walked up to the papers, and placed his hand down on them. They calmed down. "How on earth are you doing this?" I asked in shock. "Oh, isn't it obvious?" he said. "This is you, your brain. These are all your thoughts and ideas." "Cool. Wait, why am I here?" I asked. "I have to show you something very important. It's going to spark something inside of you, and that's what I'm looking for," he said as he started to run towards the other end of the row of boxes. "Hurry up!" I began to run after him, and I couldn't help but notice all the labels of boxes in my brain. One keyword unleashed a ton of things that are related to it. It was the most magnificent thing I had ever seen. After what almost seemed like 10 minutes, we arrived at the end of the rows of boxes. There was another door, but it was locked and could only be opened with a key. "Would you do the honors?" he asked me, looking at me like I knew something. I was confused, yet I reached into my pocket for some reason, and a key appeared. Yes, right away," I said, as I walked forward and opened the door. When I opened it, a cold gust of wind blew onto us. In the room was a water tunnel. The water spun so fast that it made its shape of a hallway. In the middle, there was a metal bridge leading across to another hallway. Little me walked through and I followed. The door slammed behind us. There seemed to be a purplish tint as we walked through the water hall, which made it even eerier. We arrived at the hallway as we started to walk through. Suddenly, the cold wind stopped blowing on me and everything was silent. The one thing that we could hear were the sounds of our own footsteps. We walked across the hallway and arrived at an elevator. We stepped into the elevator, and I waited for my other self to push the button. But there were no buttons, only a keypad. I looked in shock. "What kind of elevator is this?" I asked him. "You type in coordinates, and it takes you there. I can't help you here, so you must decide where you want to go," he explained, and I nodded. I closed my eyes. I knew that I had seen coordinates before in my memory, but I had no idea where it was from. I thought harder, and suddenly, in the very back of my mind, I saw it. It was on a piece of paper, written in red. I shot up my eyes and typed in 1001, 2380, 155, 4882, 6730, 572, 4662, 6861.190. I smiled and then looked at my other self happily. He stared at me in confusion. "Where on earth are we going?" he said. The elevator shook, and a robotic voice said, "Going up," and we shot up. We both screamed as the elevator soared up faster than I had ever gone before. I held onto the handlebar in the elevator, but then it stopped. It shot to the left now, moving faster and faster. After some time of holding on very tightly to the elevator bar, we stopped. We slowly moved backward now, and then we eventually stopped once more. The doors opened, and we both fell to the ground outside before the elevator closed and shot back down into the abyss. "Where are we?" I said, after I recovered, looking at yet another door. "Exactly where we want to be," he said, as he smiled and opened the door. Inside, there was a closet. It wasn't as big as I thought it would be. It was still relatively big, but, not as big as the other room. Anyway, I looked up and I took back what I said. It went up to the heavens almost. I stared in shock, but then little me tapped me on the shoulder. I looked, and he nodded toward the boxes on the shelves next to us. They were labeled President Jones, Sky, Night, Electos, Shock, the ISS, the Thanatos, and Earth 576. I fell backward onto the boxes. Stop. This can't be happening, I yelled in fear. It is happening. This was your life. You have memories about your other life, yet you don't remember it at all. Wow, that is fascinating, little me explained, but I was furious. No, it can't be. Everyone died. Those were bad memories from my program that I created, not a reality. This is a nightmare. You are a jinx. This is not real, I yelled, getting closer and closer to little me. I grabbed him by the collar. Where the hell am I? I yelled at him. He shook in fear. Please, this isn't you. Besides, why are you even mad at me? This is your memories, he begged. This is not me. The character Rai was based on the real-life version of him, me. I couldn't have done this before. This isn't my life. Who are you? Who are you? I yelled, but he faded away, and I dropped down. I screamed in fear, anger, pain, and sadness at the same time. I looked up and saw a box labeled Sylvie, and quickly I tried to reach it, but it was long gone. I fell and fell until I suddenly landed in a street. The street was empty. I started to float up. I tried to grab onto things to prevent me from floating upwards, but nothing could stop me. I looked around the city, and I looked in terror. I was back in Las Vegas. I floated up and then I stopped. I stopped at a window. Inside, there was somebody on a couch that was starting to stand up. It was me. I floated back a little bit, but the air urged me forward. I looked at the girl helping me up. It was Sylvie. How could this happen? I was just here. I had just walked into my apartment just a couple minutes ago, and now I wasn't even in my own body. My body inside the apartment ran up to the window and punched it. The glass started to break even more. He kicked at the glass while Sylvie pulled him back, but he was staring directly at me. He could see whatever I was. I looked at my hands, but something was wrong. My hands had glowing red veins. I went to the glass on the next building to see my reflection and suddenly realized that I was Oscar, the imaginary antagonist from my memories, but they weren't even mine. I looked down and red tentacles were holding me up, smashing cars and all. I suddenly dropped, and when I made contact with the ground, it bounced me back up. I flew up to a spaceship somehow. I flew inside quickly into the control room, and I stopped in front of a man in mist. I marveled at the figure in fear. Suddenly, I shot forward, and I saw the man's eye for a split second. It looked old and fragile. I struck through the ship and reappeared outside. The ship started to fall apart. I looked in fear. What have I done? I whispered to myself in fear. I didn't even know where I was or who I was. I shot into space. Then I woke up. Rai, calm down, Sylvie said, but I shot up. I looked at the window, and sure enough, there was a mere ghost of the character of Oscar. I ran up, trying to stop him from the chaos that was about to occur. I punched the window, but he went back. I kicked at it, knowing that I was too late. Sylvie pulled me away from the glass as Oscar dropped to the street, then shot up into the sky. What has gotten into you, Rai? Sylvie said as she sat me down. Listen to me very closely. What is about to happen is something very terrible, and I can't stop it. But I think that once we come back, then we will have the answers, I blurted out. I didn't even plan to say this, but it was like somebody else had said it. What are you she started to say, but a shockwave hit the building. I stood up and ran out of the building. I looked into the sky, and I saw the spaceship that was never before seen in the sky had blown up and cracked in half. I stood up in the middle of the street as everyone around me screamed and started to run away. The sun started to set as I continued to stare. Suddenly, everyone around me melted away like ice cream. The street was empty. Rai? Sylvie said as she melted away. I ran to her, trying to save her, but it was too late. I looked back at the ship and tilted my head. My vision became blurry. Then my vision almost looked like it had glitched out, and I blacked out. I slowly started to wake up. I looked around. I was in a small room. There was a chair across from me. I stood up and went to the door and opened it. I looked around outside. Alarms were blaring all over the place. People were running in one direction. I walked out wobbly and followed the people. After stumbling a few times, I finally recognized where I was. I was in the futuristic spaceship I saw earlier. We all went to this elevator and arrived in the docking bay. We all stood in silence, and I ran to a higher spot to see what was going on. Attention, someone had said. Everyone looked at them. Something has attacked the ship and disrupted the program. This attack is not fatal. It has only hit a storage unit and no one is hurt. Meanwhile, you have all awoken from the impulse. Please do not panic. You are in a safe place. Thank you. Rogers, get down there, quick, he said as he walked away from them. He pulled out a radio and talked to someone. He nodded and signaled at some people to go somewhere, but I almost seemed to recognize one of the people he sent down. When I was in room 303 in the Four Seasons Hotel, there was a man who had given me a blueprint for another idea with a core that I had been given by Sylvie. This seemed to be the same man. I looked around at all the people. They were all shocked and looking at each other. As I was looking around, gas started to fill the air. People from the front to the back started to fall to the ground. I was at a higher place, so it would take some time before it reached me. I looked at the people, but one girl caught my eye. I started to fall asleep, but I could identify the girl who was sleeping as no other girl than Sylvie herself. That was the last thing I could remember before I passed out. I woke up in the street around a day later. I looked around and everyone else was as clueless as me. I looked at Sylvie, but then I could remember the girl that I had seen a day ago in the docking bay. What happened? She asked me. I don't know, I said, but I continued to stare at her. The man on the intercom had said that we would forget everything, but something happened because I could remember everything. I could remember that day in the school, the day in the hospital, the prison, NORAD, the Thanatos with my crew, and Sylvie. All of them had died, but I had awoken in a magical place. I was forced into this program that I didn't want to live in. Since I could compare the two places, I recognized that everything that I yelled to my little self in anger was fake. Everything that had happened in my fake memories was actually my life before this. I was living in a program, and I had just woken up to the real world for the first time. All these new thoughts flooded my mind as I pondered why I could remember. I now had an understanding of why I was mad at a person named Oscar, what the monsters in the school were, and why I survived for the longest time. I was always meant to remember. Although everyone around me looked at me in shock, I knew that all of us were stuck in a prison. A real prison of survivors. I went back inside the building with Sylvie. We both sat down. I've got it, I told her out of the blue. What do you mean? She said. When I said that I knew where the beginning was, I went to a school. In that school, I found a briefcase. I couldn't be able to grab it, but when I put it in the energy core, it transported me to another reality, another telling of the story. So, what if we intended to make the machine powerful enough to almost tear the fabric of reality, but peek into another life of ours? A multiverse machine, I exclaimed. I would go along with you, but I need to know one thing. Are you sure that you understand the consequences of what we could do if this goes south? I understand, I said. We can do this correctly without having to worry about the consequences. I believe in us. All right, where do we start? She asked. I looked out of the window. We're going to need a lot of materials, I laughed. She smiled and nodded. She went into the next room to make a phone call. I walked outside and went up to room 303. I had knocked on the door. The same man I had seen on the ship, Rogers, came out and nodded. I peered at him. What do you want? He said. Nothing, just seeing if you were still here, I lied. Okay, he said as he shut the door. I looked out of the window back in my room. I laughed at myself. Déjà vu, I said, as I touched the broken glass that I had punched and seen before. I smiled and realized that nothing was as it seemed anymore. This episode was recorded by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out the next part. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.